Tragically, on this day, a brick wall collapsed in Melbourne's Swanston Street and fatally injured 3 pedestrians that were passing by. The wall that was built in the 1960s was one of a few structures remaining at the location, which was the proposed site for an $800 million project by the owner, Grocon. At the time of the incident, there were winds measured to be up to 100 km an hour around the city, and these winds may well have been acting on a 10-metre high wall and a sign that exceeded the height of that wall, and engineers said may well have acted as a sail. Obviously, such an incident which resulted in the deaths of 3 people would not go without consequences. The construction heavyweight Grocon and smaller subcontractor Aussie Signs, who were the company responsible for erecting the sign, are now facing up to $9 million in fines after they had been criminally charged for their negligence and involvement in the deaths of these people. Grocon Builders Victoria and Aussie Signs were both charged with 2 breaches of the Victorian OH&S Act of 2004. Firstly, Act 23, which is for failing to protect the public, and Act 26 for failing to provide a safe workplace. Grocon, the Victoria Street Division, was also charged under Section 26 of the Act. Each of these charges carries a maximum fine of 9,000 penalty points or $1.3 million. As it has been found that there was at least 8 things that WorkSafe say Grocon and Aussie Signs negligently failed to do, it would be quite difficult for these companies to get off with anything less than maximum charges, especially with so much media attention around the case. These 8 things were: before the sign was installed, they failed to produce a detailed design which included how the sign was to be attached to the wall and how the entire structure could be braced. Prior to the installation of the sign, there was no risk assessment for the wind loading on the structure. Before the installation of the sign, there was also no engineer's assessment of the wall's ability to hold the sign. There wasn't even a building permit for the sign. It was not seen whether the sign would increase the lateral wind loading as it exceeded the height of the wall, and if there was to be extra wind loading, there was no extra bracing added to the wall. There needed to be a reduction in wall height so it could be approved and a safe sign could be built upon it, and there was no risk assessments after the sign was attached to the wall to see whether it was safe or if it needed any modification. From all of these numerous things that were found to be missed by both Grocon and Aussie Signs, it is very clear that they were at fault and should be found guilty of this very avoidable accident. It is obvious that there was a clear lack of OH&S as they completely looked past the wall and sign as a potential hazard, which is the first simple step in the hazard management process. Whilst this is clearly an extreme case of pedestrians being injured whilst passing by construction, pedestrians being hurt around construction isn't as uncommon as perhaps you might think. There are always numerous incidents each year, such as the Prahran scaffold collapse in 2009, there was another scaffold collapse in Sydney earlier this year, and even as recently as last week, on the very same site as the wall collapse, a temporary construction roof was pulled off in strong winds and thrown onto the footpath. At this point it is unclear who was at fault, but it was on the worksite of Grocon. Fortunately, in all of these incidents, none of them took any lives, but things can always be learnt from such incidents. But perhaps Grocon haven't learnt their lesson, as it's now 2 incidents in 2 years from the exact same site. Putting regulations in place in order to stop such tragedies from reoccurring are very justified. But there are already many regulations to avoid such things in all 10 different OH&S Acts of Australia. But if these regulations are in place, they can still be ignored, and negligence is often the biggest problem, and it seems to now be a reoccurring problem for Grocon, and is the reason 3 young Australians lost their lives in such a tragic accident.
Created using Powtoon.